Sarah stared at the pregnancy test in her trembling hands, two pink lines glaring back at her like an accusation. Outside their Denver apartment, October snow was already dusting the Rocky Mountains, but inside, her world had just shifted on its axis. This should have been joy. Instead, all she could think about was the credit card statement hidden in her purse and Michael's empty beer bottles scattered across their coffee table. "Michael!" she called out, her voice catching. "Can you come here for a second?" The silence that followed would later feel prophetic. Their cramped Aurora apartment told the story of young love colliding with harsh reality. IKEA furniture sat awkwardly next to expensive wedding gifts they'd never used. Baby books formed precarious towers next to unpaid bills. Sarah had always been the planner, the organizer. At 28, she managed marketing campaigns for a tech startup, believing that with enough effort, any challenge could be conquered. Michael represented everything she wasn't: spontaneous, easygoing, the guy who could make her laugh until her sides ached. But lately, that easy confidence felt more like carelessness. His laugh, once so familiar, now seemed reserved for conversations that didn't include her. "A baby?" Michael's face drained of color when she showed him the test. "Sarah, we can barely manage rent as it is." "We'll figure it out," she heard herself saying, though the words felt hollow. She could see him mentally calculating expenses, thinking about the promotion he'd been passed over for. But it wasn't the money that made her stomach twist. It was the way he looked at the test like it was evidence of some crime they'd committed together. Over the following months, as her body changed, Michael seemed to retreat. The belly that should have been their shared miracle became something he avoided touching. Conversations about baby names died mid-sentence. Instead, he threw himself into work and weekend trips with friends. "Jake's going through a rough divorce," he'd say. "He needs support right now." But Sarah noticed things. New cologne. Texts that made him smile in ways she hadn't seen in months. His sudden passionate opinions about bands she'd never heard him mention. During their increasingly frequent arguments, she'd feel sharp kicks against her ribs, as if their unborn daughter was protesting the discord surrounding her. Sarah tried to bridge the growing gap. She planned romantic dinners that Michael ate while scrolling through his phone. She suggested baby-related activities that he participated in with the enthusiasm of someone completing a chore. She even started going to prenatal appointments alone. The breaking point came at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday in March. Sarah woke to contractions that felt like her body was turning inside out. The space beside her in bed was empty, the sheets cold. Michael's phone went straight to voicemail on the first call, then the second, then the third. By the 17th call, her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the phone. When he finally answered, his voice was thick with sleep and something else she couldn't identify. "I'm at Jake's," he mumbled, and she could hear movement in the background, hushed voices. "I'll be right there." Each contraction reminded her that she was about to become a mother, but the empty passenger seat made it clear she was doing it alone. Michael arrived at Denver Health Medical Center 40 minutes later, his hair disheveled, his clothes wrinkled like he'd slept in them. But it was the scent that hit her first, sweet and floral, a perfume she'd never worn. He looked guilty and scared and completely unprepared for the moment about to change their lives forever. Emma entered the world with a cry that filled every corner of the delivery room. As the doctor placed their daughter on Sarah's chest, she felt a love so fierce it took her breath away. This tiny, perfect person with her father's nose and her own stubborn chin was everything she'd hoped for and more. Michael held Emma like she was made of spun glass, tears streaming down his face in a way that reminded Sarah of their wedding day. For one brief moment, she thought this was the moment that would bring them back to each other. "She's perfect," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Yes," Sarah agreed, but his phone buzzed insistently on the hospital table, and she watched his eyes flick toward it with an expression she couldn't quite read. 3 months later, their life had settled into a rhythm that felt both familiar and completely foreign. Michael was everything she could have asked for as a father. He woke for night feedings without complaint, changed diapers with efficiency, and sang to Emma in a soft voice that made Sarah's heart ache, but as a husband, he felt like a stranger who happened to share their address. He performed the tasks of fatherhood with dedication while looking through Sarah as if she were glass. They moved around each other like polite roommates, coordinating schedules while carefully avoiding any conversation that went deeper than logistics. In the dark hours before dawn, when Emma was finally sleeping and Michael lay breathing steadily beside her, Sarah would trace her wedding ring with her thumb. The simple gold band that had once felt like a promise now felt like a question mark. When had they stopped being us and started being you and me and the baby? When had she become the kind of woman who checked his phone when he was in the shower? She twisted the ring around her finger, remembering the day he'd placed it there, the promises they'd made, the future they'd imagined. Now it felt like a beautiful lie she wore out of habit, a symbol of something that might have died without either of them noticing exactly when it stopped breathing. Sarah found the receipt by accident. She was digging through Michael's jacket pocket, searching for Emma's lost pacifier, when her fingers closed around a crumpled piece of paper. The Cherry Cricket, a downtown Denver burger joint they'd never visited together. The timestamp read last Thursday, 7:45 p.m., the same Thursday Michael had texted her about working late. Her hands trembled as she smoothed the receipt against their kitchen counter. 2 meals, 2 drinks, 1 shared chocolate brownie. She knew Michael's order by heart. Bacon cheeseburger, no tomato, extra pickles. But there was a second order that made her stomach drop. A veggie burger with sweet potato fries. Michael had always mocked veggie burgers, calling them disappointment on a bun. Emma's sharp cry jolted her back to reality. She crumpled the receipt and shoved it back, but the damage was done. The whisper of doubt that had lived in the back of her mind for months was now screaming. Sarah had returned to work when Emma turned 12 weeks old, juggling marketing campaigns with pumping sessions and sleepless nights. She felt like she was drowning while maintaining the perfect breaststroke. Michael had become an exceptional father. He'd sing to Emma in a voice Sarah barely recognized, soft, tender, completely present. With Emma, he was everything she'd dreamed of. With Sarah, he'd become a polite roommate. "Who's Jessica?" The question slipped out one evening as they sat at their dining table, Emma babbling in her high chair. Michael had been scrolling through his phone. His thumb froze. "Jessica, who?" "You just got a text from Jessica. I saw her name." "Oh." He set the phone face down. "She works at the office. Administrative stuff. Probably about the Miller project." But something in his tone made Sarah's chest tighten. She wanted to press further, but Emma launched her bowl of carrots across the kitchen. By the time Sarah cleaned up, Michael had disappeared into the shower. Sarah became a detective in her own home. She noticed everything now. The way Michael's face lit up when his phone buzzed, how he'd started taking calls in their bedroom with the door closed. The sudden appearance of after-work events. "Dave's having a birthday thing," he'd announce, grabbing his keys and cologne. "Jessica organized something nice for the team." Jessica. The name appeared in Michael's explanations with increasing frequency. Sarah found herself Googling Michael's company directory late one night. Jessica Torres, administrative assistant, stared back at her from a professional headshot. 26 years old with bright eyes and a toothpaste commercial smile. No wedding ring visible. She was exactly the kind of woman Sarah had been 5 years ago. Optimistic, unencumbered. One evening, Sarah found herself sitting in her car outside Michael's office building. When the glass doors opened at 7:30 p.m. and Michael emerged alongside a petite brunette who threw her head back laughing, Sarah knew she'd been lying to herself. She recognized that version of Michael instantly. The charming one who'd once made her laugh until her sides ached. The man who'd been missing from their dinner table was apparently alive and well, just not for her. The confirmation came on a Thursday in August. Sarah was settling Emma down for her nap when Michael's laptop chimed from their bedroom. He'd left it open on their bed, something he never did anymore. The notification preview glowed on the screen. "Can't wait to see you tonight. Jake's Martini Bar, 8 p.m. Miss you already, Jay." Sarah's legs stopped working. She sank onto their bed, Emma still drowsy in her arms, and opened the email thread. Months of messages scrolled past. Inside jokes about coworkers Sarah had never met. Plans for lunches never mentioned at home. "You make me feel alive again," one of Michael's responses read. Another message made her stomach turn. "Sarah's been so focused on the baby, she barely sees me anymore. With you, I feel like myself again." The betrayal wasn't just the obvious one. It was seeing her own marriage dissected and dismissed, her struggles as a new mother reduced to complaints shared with another woman. Emma stirred in her arms, and Sarah realized her tears were falling onto their daughter's soft hair. When Michael came home that evening, Sarah was sitting at their kitchen table with his laptop open. Emma slept peacefully in her bouncer. "We need to talk," Sarah said. Michael's face went white when he saw the screen. For a long moment, neither spoke. "Sarah, I can explain." But his voice had no conviction. "Just tell me the truth. For once." Michael sat down heavily, hands shaking as he ran them through his hair. "I never meant for any of this to happen. But it did happen. For months." "I love you," he said, and Sarah could hear the truth in his voice, which somehow made it worse. "I love Emma, but I've been so lost since she was born and Jessica. She makes me feel like the person I used to be." "And I don't?" The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Emma's breathing was the only sound in the room. "I think," Michael said slowly, each word seeming to cost him something, "we need to talk about what comes next." Sarah stared down at her wedding ring, the simple gold band that had once represented everything she believed about love and commitment. 3 years ago, she'd believed love was enough. That marriage was a choice you made once and honored forever. Now she wondered if she'd been naive. If she'd confused being needed with being loved. If the woman Michael had fallen in love with had disappeared somewhere between pregnancy hormones and sleepless nights. She slipped the ring off her finger, surprised by how easily it came off. She set it on the table between them, where it made a small, final sound against the wood. The ring sat there like a question mark, reflecting the kitchen light in ways that reminded her of all the promises they'd made and all the ways they'd failed to keep them. "I want to try to make this work," Sarah said, but even as the words left her mouth, she wasn't sure she meant them. They were sitting at their kitchen table the morning after the confrontation, Emma babbling in her high chair between them, the laptop now closed but its revelations still hanging heavy in the air. Michael shifted uncomfortably, not quite looking at her. "I ended it with Jessica." "When?" "Last night, after we talked." Sarah watched him carefully. "And how did she take that?" She was upset, but she understood. There was something in his tone that made Sarah's stomach twist. Not relief or determination, but something that sounded almost like regret. He wasn't saying he was glad to end it. He was saying he knew he had to. Over the next few weeks, they tried to find their way back to each other, but every conversation felt like walking through a minefield. Michael seemed genuinely committed to making things work, but Sarah found herself analyzing his every word, looking for signs that he was thinking about Jessica. "I feel like I'm managing everything alone," she said one evening as they attempted dinner together. Emma had finally fallen asleep. Michael's fork stopped midway to his mouth. "That's not fair, Sarah. I work 60-hour weeks to keep this family afloat. I help with Emma constantly. I do the dishes, take out trash, handle all the bills." "You complete tasks," Sarah said, feeling familiar frustration rise. "But you don't actually see me. When was the last time you asked how I'm doing? Really asked? You handle everything so efficiently that I figured you had it under control. I always need something. I'm just exhausted from asking for help that never comes, so I stopped asking." Michael set down his fork and looked at her directly. "What do you want me to do, Sarah? I'm trying here. I ended things with Jessica. I'm home every night. I'm doing everything I can think of to fix this." "But you resent me for it," Sarah said quietly. "I can see it in your face. You feel like you're being punished." Michael was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Maybe I do resent it sometimes. Not you, exactly, but this whole situation. Jessica was the first person in months who didn't make me feel like I was failing at everything. The honesty hit Sarah like a physical blow. So what does that mean for us? I don't know, Michael said, and the uncertainty in his voice was almost worse than if he'd said he wanted to leave. I want this, Sarah, but I don't know how to get back to that place. They continued trying for several more weeks, but every attempt at intimacy felt forced. Michael was physically present but emotionally distant, going through the motions while Sarah watched him struggle. One evening in late September, as Sarah was feeding Emma her bedtime bottle, Michael appeared in the nursery doorway. I've been thinking about what you said, he began carefully, about how I don't see you, and I realize you're right, but I also think maybe you stopped seeing me too. Sarah looked up from Emma's sleepy face. What do you mean? I mean, you stopped seeing me as your partner and started seeing me as another problem to solve. Every suggestion felt like criticism. Every attempt I made to help felt wrong. The accusation stung because there was truth in it. I was trying to keep everything together, Michael. Someone had to. I know, but in doing that, you also took over everything. And then you resented me for not participating, but you'd already made it clear that my participation wasn't really wanted unless it was exactly the way you would do it. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. So this is my fault? Your affair is my fault because I tried too hard to be a good wife and mother? No, Michael said quickly. The affair was my fault, my choice, my cowardice. But the distance between us, I think we both contributed to that. They talked for another hour that night, the most honest conversation they'd had in months. But instead of bringing them closer together, it seemed to highlight just how far apart they drifted. A few days later, Michael brought up the idea that had been hanging unspoken between them. I think I need some space, he said as they cleaned up after dinner. Not permanently, but I need time to figure out what I actually want. Sarah felt her heart sink even though she'd been expecting this moment. How much space? I was thinking I could stay at Jake's place for a while. I'd still see Emma every day, still help with everything, but you wouldn't have to come home to me every night, Sarah finished for him. Michael's silence was answer enough. That night, Sarah watched Michael pack a duffel bag with methodical care. Emma babbled contentedly from her bouncer, unaware that her small world was about to be fundamentally altered. I'll still see Emma every single day, he promised, his voice thick with emotion. This separation isn't about her. I know, Sarah said. Emma was the one thing they'd gotten completely right. But it is about us, about the fact that apparently love isn't enough. Michael paused in his packing. Sarah, I need you to understand something. The affair, the distance, all of it. That was me being a coward. It wasn't your fault. But you still don't want to stay and fight for this. He closed his eyes for a long moment, and when he opened them, they looked older than they had that morning. I don't know how to want to stay. I don't even know how to be the husband you deserve. Michael paused at their front door, his duffel bag slung over his shoulder. This isn't goodbye, he said, though they both knew it might be. It's just space. After the door closed behind him, Sarah sat in their living room with Emma sleeping against her chest, wondering if this was what rock bottom felt like. The apartment felt simultaneously too empty and too full of memories. She looked down at her bare ring finger, the pale band of skin where her wedding ring had lived for 3 years. She'd stopped wearing it after their confrontation, telling herself it was temporary. The ring now lived in her jewelry box, nestled between earrings she never wore and the pearl necklace her grandmother had given her. Hidden but not discarded, like a promise she wasn't ready to break but couldn't quite manage to keep. As she sat there in the growing darkness, listening to Emma's peaceful breathing and the silence Michael had left behind, Sarah realized that sometimes love wasn't enough. Sometimes two people could love each other and still not know how to be together. But knowing that didn't make it hurt any less. Sarah found herself in the self-help section of Barnes& Noble on a Tuesday afternoon, Emma strapped to her chest, surrounded by books promising solutions to problems she'd never imagined having. Titles like Conscious Uncoupling seemed to mock her from their colorful spines. A slim volume caught her attention, The Empowered Wife by Laura Doyle. The subtitle promised to create the marriage you want without waiting for your husband to change. Sarah almost laughed at the absurdity. Michael was living in a studio apartment across town, picking up Emma every other day with awkward politeness. Their divorce lawyer had penciled in their first meeting for next month. But something about the tired but resolute woman on the cover stopped her from putting the book back. Sarah tucked it under her arm and headed to check out. October in Denver brought golden light. Sarah had moved in with her sister Emily temporarily. Emily's Capitol Hill apartment was compact but cozy, filled with thriving plants and photographs from solo trips to Morocco and Iceland. Emily had always been Sarah's opposite. At 34, she was contentedly single, fiercely career-focused, the kind of woman who booked last-minute flights and came back with incredible stories. "You don't need him, you know," Emily said one evening as they sat on her tiny balcony. "You're incredible on your own." But being alone felt nothing like Sarah had expected. Instead of liberation, she mostly felt hollow. Not because she desperately needed Michael back, but because somewhere in trying to save their marriage, she'd completely lost track of who she was. "I don't even recognize myself anymore," she confessed to Emily over pad that one evening. "I used to have opinions about things beyond diapers and sleep schedules." "When was the last time you did something purely because it made you happy?" Emily asked. Sarah's laugh came out hollow. "I have a 6-month-old. I don't do things for enjoyment anymore." "What used to light you up?" The question hit Sarah hard. "I used to write. I kept journals, wrote terrible poetry. I had a blog about the Denver music scene that probably 5 people read, but I loved it. So start writing again." "What's stopping you besides your own assumptions?" Sarah started small. She bought a new journal and began writing for 10 minutes each morning while Emma napped. Initially, it was pure venting anger about Michael's betrayal, exhaustion about single motherhood. But gradually, other observations crept in. Notes about Emma's developing personality, how her laugh was starting to sound like music. She started taking Emma on long walks through Washington Park, not because the baby needed fresh air, but because Sarah had forgotten what it felt like to move through the world for her own pleasure. She'd buy coffee and sit on benches, feeling quiet contentment. The changes were subtle but unmistakable. Sarah found herself humming while folding laundry, paying attention to what she actually wanted to eat, buying herself sunflowers just because they reminded her of happiness. She began reading Laura Doyle's book. The words about feminine energy and surrender felt foreign at first. But as Sarah read about women who'd transformed their marriages by changing their own behavior rather than trying to fix their husbands, something shifted. Had she really been trying to control everything? Looking back, she could see it, the way she'd taken over household decisions, corrected Michael's parenting techniques, managed their social calendar without consulting him. She'd thought she was being efficient, but maybe she'd been suffocating him instead. The realization was both liberating and terrifying. If she'd contributed to their marriage's breakdown, that meant she had power to influence its future. But it also meant acknowledging that the version of herself she'd become, competent, in control, indispensable, might not be the version that could sustain a happy marriage. When Michael came to pick up Emma for weekend visits, Sarah noticed he looked different. Older, more tired. The bachelor lifestyle wasn't suiting him well. "How are you doing?" he asked one Friday evening as he buckled Emma into her car seat, and Sarah realized it was the first time in months he'd asked like he genuinely wanted an answer. "I'm figuring things out," she said honestly. There was something different in his expression, a curiosity that hadn't been there. "You look different. Lighter, maybe?" Sarah felt a flutter of something she couldn't quite name. "I've been doing some thinking, trying to remember who I was before everything got complicated." Michael nodded slowly. That sounds healthy. They stood in comfortable silence, and Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in over a year, the possibility of a conversation with Michael that wasn't loaded with resentment. The breakthrough came on a snowy November afternoon. Sarah was reading while Emma played nearby when her phone rang. Michael's name made her stomach clench. He never called during her time with Emma unless there was an emergency. Sarah? His voice sounded shaky. I need to tell you something. I made a huge mistake today. What happened? I ran into Jessica at a coffee shop. She wanted to talk, get closure. And I thought, why not? Sarah's heart pounded, but strangely, she felt calmer than expected. The old Sarah would have immediately started interrogating him. But something had shifted during her month of solitude. Okay, she said simply. But sitting there with her, listening to her talk, I realized something that knocked me sideways. What I thought I had with her wasn't real at all. It was just escape from responsibility, from doing the actual hard work that real love requires. Sarah waited, giving him space to continue. She's a nice person, Sarah, but she's not you. She doesn't challenge me or make me want to be better. She just made me feel good about myself without having to earn it. And sitting there today, I realized what I really missed wasn't her. It was feeling like I mattered to someone, but I'd rather matter to you, even if it's harder. I want to come home, Sarah. I want to try again, for real this time. I know I hurt you in ways I can't take back, but maybe we could build something better. Michael, she interrupted gently. I need you to understand something. I'm not the same person you left 2 months ago. The silence stretched, filled with Emma's babbling and snow tapping against windows. I don't mean that as a threat. I mean I'm learning how to be genuinely happy on my own. I'm remembering who I am when I'm not constantly trying to fix our relationship. If we're going to try again, it has to be because we both want to build something new together, not because we're scared of being alone. I understand, Michael said quietly. Can we talk? In person? Yes, but not this week. I need more time to think about what I actually want. That evening, Sarah told Emily about the call. I think Michael wants to reconcile. Emily's face fell. And? I'm not sure if I want the same thing. Yet. Sarah looked at Emma, who was gnawing on a teething ring. I need to know that if I choose him, it's because I genuinely want to rebuild our marriage, not just because going back feels easier. That night, Sarah pulled her wedding ring from the jewelry box where it had lived for 2 months. She held it in her palm, feeling its familiar weight. It felt different now, not like a chain, but not quite like a promise either. More like a piece of metal with potential, depending entirely on the choice she was prepared to make. She set the ring on her nightstand where she could see it from bed. Not hidden like a shameful secret, not worn like an assumption, just present and waiting for her to decide what role it would play in whatever came next. I miss you. The words hung in the December air between them like a bridge neither was certain they could cross. They were sitting on a bench in Cheeseman Park, watching families build snowmen while Emma slept peacefully in her stroller. It had taken 3 weeks of careful conversations and tentative coffee dates before Michael found the courage to voice what they'd both been feeling. Sarah felt her chest tighten, but not with the familiar panic that had become her constant companion. This was something more complex, relief tangled with fear, hope wrestling with hard-earned caution. I miss you too, she said finally, her breath creating small clouds in the frigid air. But I miss the us we could become, not the us we used to be. Michael nodded slowly, his eyes fixed on a father teaching his toddler how to make snow angels nearby. I've been thinking about that constantly, about who we were during our best moments, before everything got so complicated. 3 months of separation had transformed them both. Michael looked younger somehow, though she could see new lines around his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and difficult self-reflection. He'd started seeing a therapist, trying to understand why he'd systematically destroyed the best relationship in his life. Sarah found herself seeing him with fresh eyes for the first time in years. Not as the husband who constantly disappointed her, but as a flawed human being genuinely trying to figure out how to be better. She realized that somewhere in the exhausting process of new parenthood, she'd stopped seeing him as her partner and started viewing him as just another problem that needed her management. "I think we forgot how to be friends," she said, watching Emma's peaceful face. "We got so consumed with being perfect parents that we lost track of why we enjoyed each other's company." "Yes, exactly." Michael agreed with enthusiasm that reminded her of their early dating conversations. "We stopped being Michael and Sarah, who happened to be married, and became this married unit that had forgotten what made us individuals worth loving." "I want to try again," Michael said, his voice carrying determination she hadn't heard in months. "But I absolutely don't want to go back to the way things were before. I don't want to return to feeling like everything I did was somehow wrong, and I don't want you to feel like you're carrying our entire family alone." Sarah adjusted Emma's blanket and considered her words carefully. "I've been reading about marriage dynamics, about how sometimes women take control of everything domestic and then build resentment when their partners don't participate the right way. Sarah, you didn't force me to have an affair. That choice was entirely mine." "No, but I might have created an environment where you felt like nothing you did at home was ever quite right." The admission felt like jumping off a cliff. "I think I was so terrified of things falling apart that I stopped allowing you to actually contribute in meaningful ways. And I was so afraid of failing that I eventually just stopped trying altogether," Michael replied. "It felt easier to withdraw completely than to keep disappointing you." Over the following weeks, they began what could only be described as dating again. An absurd concept when you shared a daughter. But it worked. Coffee dates while Emma napped at Emily's apartment. Slow walks through the Denver Botanic Gardens, talking about books and music. Long conversations about everything except their marriage, until gradually they remembered what had drawn them together originally. Michael shared stories about his childhood that Sarah had never heard, about the deep fear of abandonment that had lived in his chest since his father disappeared when he was 8. Sarah opened up about her lifelong struggle with perfectionism, the exhausting weight of believing that her worth depended on her ability to control every outcome. "I don't need you to be perfect," she told him one evening as they sat in his car outside Emily's building. "I need you to be genuinely present and engaged, not just going through the motions." "And I don't need you to fix everything," he replied. "I need you to trust me enough to let me figure some things out in my own way, even if my way looks different from yours." They kissed then, hesitant and careful like teenagers afraid of being caught. It felt simultaneously familiar and entirely new, like rediscovering something precious they'd thought was lost forever. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. There were setbacks, moments when old patterns threatened to resurface. One evening, Sarah caught herself about to criticize the way Michael was giving Emma her bath, then stopped herself and walked away instead. "I had to bite my tongue so hard I thought I might draw blood," she admitted later. "But you were doing fine. Emma was happy. Just because you do it differently doesn't mean you're doing it wrong." Michael smiled. "I noticed you left the room. I was proud of both of us in that moment." They made agreements about how they wanted to move forward. Sarah would practice trusting Michael to handle things his way. Michael would practice being fully present, putting his phone away during family time, asking Sarah how she was feeling instead of assuming she had everything under control. The moment of truth arrived on a quiet Sunday in January. They'd spent the entire day together as a family at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science, watching Emma's eyes widen at the colorful displays. For several hours, they'd felt like the family Sarah had always imagined they could be, relaxed, connected, genuinely enjoying each other. As they sat in the museum cafe sharing a soft pretzel and watching Emma systematically destroy a teething biscuit, Michael reached across the small table and took Sarah's hand. "I want to come home," he said, his voice steady but his eyes vulnerable. "Not to recreate what we had before, but to build something completely new, with different rules and deeper understanding." Sarah felt tears threatening to spill over. "I'm terrified," she whispered. "So am I. but I'm more terrified of spending the rest of my life wondering what we might have become if we'd been brave enough to try again. They moved with deliberate slowness. Michael began coming back gradually. Dinner one night, then two, then staying over on weekends. They established entirely new rhythms. Date nights became sacred. Daily appreciation became practice. Problems were addressed immediately, before they could fester into resentments. It wasn't perfect. Some days were still challenging, still required conscious effort and difficult conversations, but it felt authentic in a way their previous marriage never had. They were choosing each other daily, not just defaulting to each other out of habit. 6 months later, they renewed their vows in a small ceremony at Roxborough State Park, surrounded by red rock formations and dramatic Colorado sky. Emma babbled happily in Sarah's arms throughout the ceremony, while Emily cried from the front row. The rings they exchanged weren't the same ones from their original wedding. Those belonged to the people they used to be. These new rings were simple platinum bands engraved with Emma's birth date, representing who they were becoming. Imperfect people committed to choosing each other daily. Parents learning to love their child without losing themselves. As Sarah slipped the new ring onto her finger, she thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. The original wedding ring, still tucked away in her jewelry box, had represented a love built on assumptions. This ring represented something entirely different, a love built on conscious choice, on the decision to see each other clearly, to support without controlling. That evening, Sarah finally wrapped the old wedding ring in tissue paper and placed it in a memory box along with other artifacts from their former life. Some symbols were meant to be honored, then gently released to make room for whatever came next. Their story wasn't about perfect love or fairy tale endings. It was about two broken people who learned to choose each other every day, who discovered that real love isn't about never falling down, it's about helping each other get back up. And in that small apartment in Denver, with their daughter sleeping peacefully in the next room, Sarah and Michael began writing a new chapter of their love story, one conscious choice at a time,